Okay, guys, welcome back for another space. Probably you already have read the thread over the Horizon 2025 that I posted yesterday. It was a bit on the dry side in the sense that I didn't add much technical details. It was mostly a general approach, contrary to what was done last year. This is a first draft. There is not much to say of the more technical approach with maps and different approaches on how to deal with Dobropilia and then how to cut through the railroad interchanger will happen later, probably before the end of the month, because it's just maps and a couple of tactical and logistical details. Now, if you remember what was said on the thread, then I'm going to make a recap. So pretty much the recap is as basic as it comes, honestly. There is no much to say. So basically we said, we reviewed a little bit the targets for 2024. We would say that those targets are more or less on track, but it could have been a lot better. So at minima, it was pretty normal. 4 out of the 6 targets that were laid out are okay. So the buffer from Donetsk is there. The advancement east-west of the front generally, not in all sectors of course, but generally has worked. We are, especially in the Donbass area, over 20 kilometers on some spots, over 35 on others, but mostly the Ukrainian forces have been pushed out of their defensive line since 2014, which is the main crux of the matter when it comes to the war in Donbass itself. Now, after that, of course, as I said, some things were unforeseen. The re-entry in Kharkov as a opportunistic operation. Honestly, I wouldn't have done it. I made a couple of threads of it, a couple of space over it. If they were to be focused on that, some things would have been done to cut people back on Kupiansk. They didn't. The overreaction of the Ukrainian side was a good and a bad thing. Good thing because it allowed a definitive advance in the Pokrovsk area, and a bad thing because whatever the plan was with Kharkov, or the view that we had with Kharkov, that never panned out, mostly because the Ukrainians plugged the holes, had the chance to employ Western weapons on Russian ground, and the Russians themselves saw that the minimum objectives were okay. Some stuff happened there which I'd say were also worth it. For instance, Volchansk is completely razed, so it cannot be used as a staging point towards the Belgorod Oblast. But it's, in a certain sense, if we stop just to the bait part and to the fact that it drained forces on the Ukrainian side, it would be enough. Other than that, it was mostly costly bait that started at some point to turn a bit like Krinky for the Ukrainians, but then the Russians themselves stabilized and seemed not to push too far and not to allow the Ukrainians to have cheap shots, especially on civilian vehicles. Then after this, there was Kursk in August. Kursk, as I already explained, initially could have been some kind of, panic, but it never materialized. More and more people are saying that whatever happened there from the 1st to the 7th day, so the first week, after the first week it was a completely different game, and the Ukrainians probably fail their operational implementation of the plan, how whatever Sirski or whoever had designed this had thought, because they were quickly correlated to a certain area where they're being kicked the shit out right now, and slowly the Russians are taking. They are pushing from Borgi towards Plekovo. They are pushing from Korenovo towards Malaya Lokna. They pushed completely these assholes from Ustinovka. I have cut them up to Novoyanovka. Anyway, basically it's slowly going down, and the most important part is that the Ukrainians lost far more than the Russians, including Western equipment. And most importantly, once again, it's so-called elite formations that were used for this shit, 21st, 82nd, 80th, along with other faggots. But basically what happened is that they got their asses handed to them, and now it's just a matter of how much do we want the Ukrainians to stop wasting shit in Kursk and turning it around like it happened with Pokrovsk. Once all is said and done, then we have to face the music, and music in this case is, as I said, three main salients. One is Siversk, huge one that would need really good workout. Torres Konstantinovka, that's actually our, Matryoshka salience, because the real salient is Chasov Yar, Toretsk, towards Konstantinovka. But the fact that Toretsk is very important, given it's a rather fucking large city, over 30,000 inhabitants, basically bigger than anything Ukrainians have approached the last 18 months, it would allow the Russians to have a springboard. So Golovka was nice, Zalizne was nice, New York is nice, whatever, but the most important part is Toretsk. Once you have Toretsk, you get the springboard, and you also can go straight south to north towards Konstantinovka and create this 2/4 of a cauldron when it comes to it. And of course we need to check about Chasov Yar as well, because the move from Kalinina is extremely important and very underrated. The Ukrainians and the Russians are not speaking a lot about it, but the fighting is ongoing. And then finally we have the Velika Novosibirska Ugledar. That one is going down right now. Russians will probably be in Novoukrayinka within the end of the week. They will hopefully finish Ugledar within the end of the week, and then we'll join to the huge bulge that you have between Ugledar and Novoukrayinka, and that would, of course, allow the Ukrainians to, pause and reflect on what they want to do. Because one of the things that we're seeing with the existing cauldrons, especially the one that is currently extremely important, that Deep State doesn't want to clean up, which is between Zelane Druhe and Hostre, the one that came from Krasnogorivka, that we said that it would be the death of the whole formation defending Pokrovsk. This is exactly what's happening right now. The Russians are taking their time, they're advancing slowly, they're trying to close the cauldron properly, and once that is closed, then you have a huge problem for Kurakovo, because the line, as I said, is now both on the top of the Kurakovo salient. I posted, I think I posted yesterday, I'm not sure, but I'm going to try and repost today, the expanse of the defensive lines around Kurakovo. It's extremely hilarious, because up north they are counting on the body of water over Kurakovo to protect them from the Russians. But actually, if the Russians are over there, they are trapping themselves within their own trenches. And this is one of the things that I actually asked myself, what the fuck is going on with the Ukrainians? How the fuck is it possible that someone saw the terrain, the topography, and said, oh, you know what? We're going to just do a trench all over half of Kurakovo. The other one's just the lake. It's going to be fine. And sometimes I have this revelations that probably a lot of the people who are leading the Ukrainians to battle, and that's also true in certain sense for the Russians, are absolute mentally retarded. Like, there is no way someone does that and says it's fine. And I said the same thing. There was no way that someone within the Ukrainian armed forces checked the lineup to attack Kursk and said, this shit, yeah, baby, we're doing this. This is the perfect lineup to do that. I mean, sometimes it reeks of desperation, sometimes it reeks of something else, but it's extremely problematic for me to actually try and find out if it's the real state of the Ukrainian army, which is basically retards leading Mongoloids, or it's something that I'm not seeing there. It's like a huge bait, it's a prank, this is a simulation, all these people aren't dead, and I'm dreaming, which is of course absolutely nonsense. But the point is, the more I check at maps, actually on both sides, I'm not going to lie to you, in March 2023 I also had a little bit of a rant about Russian positions, but they were fixed. But here, the Ukrainians, maybe they don't have the time, maybe they don't have the means, maybe as I said, it's just mental retardation. A lot of things actually, a lot of things are bad. But then, as I said, it's fine. It plays on the Russians' hands, and right now we're seeing that bit of a thrust. And it's pretty funny actually. It's I don't know what's going on. Salo, I'm gonna let you guys at the end, but right now, I'm just saying whatever. So, let's go back to what I said. Basically, after all the silence, you got two options. Looking at it from the Donbass point of view. First option is to just keep to the silence, get to the borders of Donetsk Oblast and Zaporizhia Oblast and say, okay, I've done it, it's fine. This, of course, is bullshit. First of all, because the Zaporizhia Oblast, as I said, has one part of the city beyond, and part of the oblast beyond the Dnieper. So you would have to, take losses there. Same for Kherson Oblast, over 23% is beyond the Dnieper. You'll have to take losses there. This is, in a certain sense, not acceptable. On top of it, the general layout of both oblasts, especially the one in Zaporozhye, is extremely bad for defense. First of all, it's mostly flat, which makes it very tricky, because if you get broken through, the other side is going to fly just through your defenses. Of course, now it's a different method. The Russians have over 20, 25 kilometers of depth of that thing. But still, as we saw with Kursk, sometimes if the defenses are not manned properly, they still can be something going extremely wrong, and then you have to fight on your back, and it becomes a lot more complicated. But once again, this is that right now nobody's thinking about this. However, as I said, we have this problem. Zaporozhye has that problem. Therefore, in order for Zaporozhye not to have that problem, you will have to go beyond Zaporozhye and get through to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Yesterday, I explained that the best choice for me would not be to go to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast right away, but first expand up north from Pokrovsk towards the coal basin of the Pokrovsk area. You got a series of cities there. Most of them are mining towns or metallurgy towns. They are linked by a railroad. They are on top of a crest. So basically, it's a plateau that goes and cuts through the northwestern corner of the Donetsk Oblast, and it leads you straight to the Samara River. The Samara River has a great advantage. It is extremely cliffy. So basically, you do not have valleys like in most of the places. You have really a body of water that goes down from 240 meters to immediately 60, 40, and then you got your water level. This means that as a defensive position, if you oust the Ukrainians from there, you can still, defend your point and be absolutely untouchable. Of course, when it comes to infantry alone, as we know, this war has a huge problem when it comes to the classical view of warfare, because most of the combat right now is contactless. Basically, infantry is very important, but it comes after drones, artillery, ballistic missiles, rocket attacks, helicopters, bombs, gliding bombs have been doing the job. What happens is that you first raise everything, then you mop up. Sometimes it's more complicated because you cannot always be as accurate and you cannot see everything because of the flora and all the bullshit, but most of the time infantry does mop up. There are some point attacks that the Russians are doing in order to dislodge the Ukrainians from certain positions, but on both sides, as I said, the ammunition expended is for destruction and then exploitation. This, unfortunately, makes it very complex to actually have a positive assessment, 100% of this kind of position. Okay, you got the high ground next to a river. The other side is on the low ground. Technically, it should be fine, right? Well, Ukrainians got kicked out of their high ground pretty easily by the Russians around the Cheretino, and then the Russians continued on the high ground. So normally, there should have been some kind of defensive option for the Ukrainians, given they were on same level. Didn't happen. Russians advanced, and we know the reality. However, the Samara River forced the Russians to keep going along the bank, the southern bank of the Samara River, and pretty much take from behind a lot of people that are actually helping for the defense of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Once that happens, the danger that cluster of cities is having from behind, quote unquote, makes it improbable for the Ukrainians not to try and push the Russians out of the Samara River banks. As I said, this is made easier for the Russians, given that in order to cross the river, they're going to take losses, and the easier way to do that is between Krinci and Neobarbarovka. I posted already the passage is about a 6.5 kilometer gap that gets into a choke point where, well, I estimate that the Russians are going to cut the Ukrainians if they try and do something that is not a pontooning or a crossing or a fording of the river. The only chance that the Ukrainians can counteract that is, as I said, is they counterattack the Russians while they are pushing through Dobropila. The issue with that is that you will have to bring onto that NAS, the passage I told you, so towards Krinci and Novobarbarivka, troops before you get there. But once the Russians are at Dobropila, which is 28 kilometers from that gap, you are officially into gliding bomb territory. And you are still on the flat. You are still on low ground. On top of it, Dobropila has a bifurcation, so it can go either northwest or northeast. Going northeast, if the Russians try to do that, instead of going to Alexandrovka, allows them to basically fortify the area and have literally that backstop for the Ukrainians that might try to go from Kharkov. Once that battle happens, which will be attritional in nature for the Ukrainians in this case, the problem is that Ukrainians will be spending a lot of their potential just to come across. This would allow the Russians, as I say, to maybe try and cross the Samara River a bit westwards of Alexandrovka, and that would also make them cross the three oblast area, three oblast, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, Donetsk, and therefore establish a follow-up on the Samara River, which, if you see it on Google Maps or whatever, actually is the natural barrier of both Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkov Oblast towards the Oblast of Donetsk. Now, once we say all this, if the Russians manage that, I already said, it would be a minimum of 1,800 kilometers that they would take as a slice out of the Ukrainian ground. It would be extremely big and would force the Ukrainians to try and block it therefore submitting themselves to what is happening almost every time the Ukrainians are doing that, UNPK Fiesta. The UNPK Fiesta so far, despite everything the Ukrainians have tried to do, destroying arsenals, blowing up airfields with some UNPKs, destroying a couple of planes, it doesn't stop. Why? I already explained this. Logistically, for the Russians, the employment of UNPKs, especially now with the longer range UNPKs and the UNPVs, is cheaper than for the Americans to send HIMARS to the Ukrainians. And of course, the Americans have also sent small diameter bombs to the Ukrainians. They also have sent GPUs, but these are limited by the bomb carriers and also by the Russian both air defense and air-to-air cap. Now, once the Russians are doing this, I think that everybody has seen the Jihadi Julian footage when he's like looking at the Su-34 coming through and literally thrashing them. Like this is the reality. The reality is like it's not some beautiful video game thing. It's just a boring 1.5 hour ferry for a couple of middle-aged dudes with some belly, dropping those bombs, going back to base, rearming, reflying another 1.5 hours, dropping the bombs, going back to base. And it's just like, it's a repetitive but effective and efficient way to put explosives on positions. So, the option towards Kharkov via the Pokrovsk Basin, in my opinion, is the best for the Russians. Because not far from there, in Kharkov, you're going to have the junction between Alexandrova and Barvinkova. Barvinkova was an absolute shit show in 2022. The Russians literally broke their teeth on that defensive salient. Most of it was due to the fact that the Ukrainians very smartly from the beginning pulled the HIMARS they got on the area. They hit Izium, they hit the troops trying to advance through the back then called Sherwood Forest, hit the Russians all over the Barvinkovo area. The Russians also had no real idea when the HIMARS would strike. The whole ISR kill chain that we have right now, when a HIMARS strikes some bullshit one day, the next day we have footage of it getting an Iskander to the face. Like this in 2022, guys, let's be honest, didn't exist. And there were maybe options, but simply the Ukrainian air defense at every level was way too important for shit like the Orion or the Forpost to go and follow up the HIMARS. It just didn't make sense, it was not possible. Because most of the time you would run into Kharkov, and Kharkov air defenses, despite the depletion, were still good enough to basically take out everything that could fly into the sky. The Russians lost not only drones there, but they lost a lot of aircraft in the air. Now, fast forward 2024, the HIMARS problem, especially once the Russians are going to cross through, is completely different now. And for that, you need to go and check the topographic map. In order for the Ukrainians to target the advancement, they would have to be in Izium. Problem is that, as I said, we have now multiple footage of Russian ISR drones that, despite getting shot down, or pretended shot down, because a lot of the footage that we see on the Ukrainian side does not show the plane, the drones actually falling. Some of them they do show, some of them they show that they're destroyed because they use explosive FPVs. But most of the FPVs that are being used right now for the interceptions are purely mechanical. So they don't blow them up. What they do is that they hit them in order to try and recover them. Most of the time it doesn't work like that. So the plane is hit, goes down, FPV is lost, and they launch a second one. In the very last video, there's the same Zala with the same camouflage, like shitty brown grayish, that is being first hit by FPV, and then a second FPV comes back and find it again. This is, as I said, this is the problem with using non-explosive, purely kinetic assets for interception, is that it's not going to work every time. It doesn't mean that it's a good thing that it survives. No, I'm just saying that not everything that Ukrainians publish is real, and also the level of employment of all these assets is far more important. It's not just, we have only 100 Zalas and it's done. Quite the contrary. The problem with Zala, every single, such ISR assets on both sides actually, be that Furia, be that Shark, be that Penguin, be that Zala, be that Orlan, is that they are relatively cheap. So in order for them to produce, 10,000, during the last visit of Monkey at STC, there was a serial number on one Orlan, 14,100 something. So just imagine, they shot down on video with the drones about 17 or 24 Orlans. There have been 14,000 produced, so I guess it's a catastrophe. But once again, it's not just we have more so we don't care. It's also a potential there that is problematic. So once you lose your oversight, you need to launch another one. It's going to take time and so on and so forth. So the problem when we have this discussion is that while it's not dramatic, it's still a problem for the continuous ISR, because this is what ISR is about. ISR is not only just we saw the guy and we intervene. The ISR in this case is a continuous 24/7 around the clock visualization of the terrain. So what happens is that what Ukrainians are creating right now is gaps in the timeline. So basically you fly your Orlan for 4 hours and another Orlan takes over because the one is going to come back, and then suddenly you lose one of the 6 or the 7 that you're going to use all over the day to have a 24/7. That's your problem. Suddenly you have a gap in intelligence. Suddenly you don't know where your target has gone. Of course, it's not that simple, because when you lose one Orlan, you launch another one, so your gap is not 4 hours, it's going to be like half an hour, 45 minutes, but it's still there. That's the problem that we have. It's the continuum that's missing. This is how important it is. A lot of volunteers and idiots from Volen course do not understand how flying a Zala works or flying an Orlan works. For them, they think it's just one Orlan, you send it and it's fine. You're going to work only with that. But just imagine, your field of view on one Zala is maybe, and I'm not saying loitering, just the field of view you're going to have. De-zooming maximum altitude for a Zala 3,600 meters, that's the maximum. You're going to have a coverage area of maybe 2 to 3 square kilometers when you're going to start detecting things, not seeing them, but oh, there's a truck that moves there, let's go and see the truck. Once you drop at the usual altitude of a Zala, so basically 600 to 800 meters, then you have a problem, because your field of view, your control of view at every single moment is going to be reduced to less than 1 square kilometer. And when you focus it, because you're going to follow, a tank, movement of troops, then suddenly everything around you is just void. You do not have eyes. That's also how they get intercepted, because they don't see around them. But now think about it. You have one Zala for maybe 40, 50 square kilometers control, and it's the only one. This is how people from the Volen course think in Russia. This is why I always told you guys there is a huge problem I have with the Russian think in general, because it seems that we have to do with other, a bit like the Ukrainian high command, mentally challenged people, or some kind of retardation in between, that these people are trying to do good and complain, but they don't understand how things work. Anyway, this was a small rant to have you think about, informational hygiene, because this is a very important thing, especially what's going right now. And then let's go back to, as I said, once you're going to have this area control around the Samara River, you're going to cross towards Barvinkove, and you are going to control probably about 50, 60, 70 square kilometers before advancing your troops. The great difference from going north to south, as Kharkov has always been attacked, from going south to north, is that Kharkov from the north is easy to defend. In the sense that there are only two main roads. And the major road is the one coming from Belgorod. It's the Lipsy, Gliboke, Tsirkuni, and Kharkov road. There's a second one, which needs to go through Stary Saltov, that comes from Vovchansk. That one was also tried. Right now, it's a small failure. So it's not going to be used like that. And if you're going to go around, same thing, you'll have to go from the above, cross the small valley, and go from, I'd say, the west of Kharkov. There too you have a huge problem because you have a huge cluster of small peri-urban sites, and they're going to fucking butcher you before you even can go to Kharkov. However, going from the south, getting Barvinkove and cutting the assholes on the Izium, and forcing them to completely turn their attention from the defense of Lipsy or Vovchansk, where they can rely on the huge area and the huge logistical base that is Kharkov. Going by the south from Barvinkove, and I would like to invite you to check the map for that. Because it's extremely interesting. It's a bit complex in the sense that Barvinkove has a river going through it. That's what helped the Ukrainians defend from the attacks coming straight from the highway from Izium. But when you come on its back, so from Alexandrivka, there is nothing to defend Barvinkove. There's literally nothing, it's just flat. And this is the funny part here. You're gonna cross the river. There is actually a passage to the Samara on the side. So the exact way where the Ukrainians are supposed to come from Kharkov to try and defend the Samara axis. Once you cross there, it's just fucking flat. There is nothing there. There is literally nothing there. You're going to have three main stops. So Zoloty Prudi, Zaparamarivka, and then you are in Barvinkove. You can also go straight, so cross the river in Alexandrivka, and then you rush, and you have only Bogdarovka, and you are in Barvinkove as well. But the issue is with Barvinkove is that it has also some bodies of water and the river going through. So once you're in Barvinkove in Kharkov Oblast, it's not that big of a chunk. Honestly, you're going to have like maybe 1,200 square kilometers of Kharkov by going there and establishing a positional defensive situation for the Ukrainians. But suddenly, the problem that you had before, which is you had Ukrainians in front of you and you had a very narrow front to attack them. Now you have a far larger front and you have a river. You are doing them what they did to the Russians with the Severny Donetsk over Siversk. And that's the beauty of this movement. It will not end the war. But suddenly, once you're in Barvinkove, you can point to two things. Either you cross or you don't cross, doesn't matter. But you are 30 kilometers from Izium, and you are 25 kilometers from Velika Komoshivka. Once you do this, then the Ukrainians start to panic because From Kharkov to Barvinkova, you have 120 kilometers. But from Barvinkova to Pokrovsk, you have only 60. And in between Pokrovsk, you have Dobropila. So, where the Ukrainians had their advantage and were like completely in control logistically with Kharkov, now suddenly everything changes. Kharkov is far away, it's over 100 kilometers. Dobropila is 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers. Pokrovsk is 65 kilometers. Your logistical advantage as Ukrainian just disappears. On top of it, the highway itself disappears. The closest highway to Barvinkovo is Izum. But Izum cannot become a front city because it's the only lifeline to Kramatorsk. If you lose Izum into a positional battle and the advance of the Russian military comes somewhere around Brashkivka, then the E40 highway, or the M3 for the Ukrainians, is only 12 kilometers away. So now you have a huge problem. If you let the Russians sit in this Pokrovsk basin, and of course, again, this is the development of the first strategy. Now your danger is losing Izum from the back and losing Kramatorsk from the back. Non-obstant, whatever happens to Kramatorsk, to the sister cities, maybe within 6 months, Chasiv has fallen, Konstantinovka has fallen, and then you just have Sloviansk and Kramatorsk as a base, so it makes no sense to start trying to save them absolutely. Then probably Zelia, we're going to try and find a way to top out, but keep Kharkov and all that shit. This is one of the main options that I think the Russians have to force that top out. If you're in Alexandrivka and you start cutting through and are threatening the MO3, for the Ukrainians, the battle that they had in Donetsk turns into a major shithole because they're not fighting in Donetsk anymore. They're fighting Kharkov, and they're fighting Kharkov to hope to keep parts of Donetsk free. This is exactly what the Russians were trying to do for a while when they were trying to attack from Lugansk in order for the Ukrainians to relent in Kharkov. And it didn't work until now. Now that Pokrovsk has fallen, and they need to keep the cities in Donbass open, there is a lot of potential for this on the Russian side. Of course, it's a long shot. That's why I said we're speaking over 15 months now. 3 months in 24 and about 12 months in 25. And of course, this entails that the Russians keep getting passage, and they get absolutely in the best position ever. And this is how also I think the Ukrainians are going to start panicking. Because right now they are not panicking. Right now the Ukrainians are fine. They don't give a fuck. Whatever is going over there is off. It's cool. It doesn't really matter. We may lose Donbass, but it's going to be slow. We're going to bleed the Russians and everything. Losing Pokrovsk and having this push towards Novoalexandrovka, as I said, they lose the whole coal basin. They lose the main internal resource for their iron processing, steel processing, their metallurgy generally. But on top of it, as I said, given that you are just at the Three Oblast area, you have also the potential for the follow-up. The follow-up is attacking from Donetsk towards Dnipropetrovsk. This one is a lot more tricky. And probably it would require a choice between the one or the other. I personally would go with exploiting the coal basin because it's also extremely important economically for the Ukrainian state as it stands. Even now, the Pokrovsk coal mine is working. Even now that they're getting fucking bombed. Just to let you imagine how important that shit is. And most importantly, Pokrovsk itself has a huge problem with Mirnograd. If you take Mirnograd, you can bypass Pokrovsk and try and cut it from behind. So get the city without having as much problem as they had with Bakhmut, when indeed they got Soledar, but instead of exploiting it, also due to Ukrainian resistance, they went head on and tried to chip the houses within the city away. And then it took probably between October and October 22, April 2023, before the Ukrainians were completely fucked up. And then it was just day after day, the Russians messing around and bombing shit up in order to reduce their casualties, although they were already substantial. Now, the other problem with attacking Dnipropetrovsk from the three oblast area is that once you are within the three oblast area, you suddenly have one major problem. So, let's say you are in Pokrovsk, you get Dobropilia, you are in Alexandrivka, and then you start, instead of pushing eastwards, east and northwards, you try and go down the river. And then, suddenly, you're going to cross the border of the oblast around Petropavlivka, which is 50 kilometers from Pokrovsk, but is a lot more easier to cross, from Donetsk to Dnipropetrovsk, following the Samara, because actually there are very little natural obstacles if you go up from Dobropila and then go down on them. If you try to do something contrary, which is develop from Pokrovsk, following either the highway or the railway, you're going to go deeper into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and are going to play exactly the game that Ukrainians would like to play. You are going to go through the highway, and that would mean that you will be short-handed. You have Pokrovsk, you want to go fast towards Petropavlivka through the E50, but all over the place you're going to have a couple of situations, like in Kamyanka is the issue, Andronivka is the issue, then you need to completely deal with Slovyanka. Slovyanka is a big fucking city. Like, we are into a logic that, honestly, I wouldn't really, how can I say this, I wouldn't at all try and push the Russians through that highway right away. It's true it can go fast, but you are really focused on one line. There is a gap there to exploit right after Pokrovsk. It's the gap between Koltine, Udashne and Sergivka, because you only have Hristin on top of it. But given that you're going to attack Pokrovsk, Hristin is going to be the next logical attempt. Going right there, you're going to gain maybe 15-20 kilometers through the E50, but then you're going to get stuck. You're going to get stuck because you're going to have the first disleveled positions that come through you. So basically, before going, as I said, to Slovyanka, you're going to have the Kamyanka, I'd say, barrier, and after that you have Andronivka. And just north of you, you're going to have Krutotarivka, which is cut by a river, but it has heights in Balkaskelka, which the Ukrainians will probably use to high-march your ass to death. So, going through the highway or the railway that goes southwest is interesting, and I'm not absolutely rejecting it, but it puts you in a situation where you are going to become just fucking cannon fodder. For the Ukrainians, going through the E50, while a dangerous gambit, because if you bypass them, you fucking roll them out of the water, and you UMPK them to death, and then take the positions, then indeed you are a lot closer to Pavlograd, you're going to be to Slavyanka, and then it's game over for about 5 to 10% of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. But going to Alexandrivka, following the Samara, means that you're going to go back on most of the Ukrainian positions, and you can attack them from two flanks. Alexandrivka from north to south, and then Dobropila from east to west. Now, you're going to tell me, like, what is this? Why are you fucking trying to go to Dnipropetrovsk? You haven't even liberated Donetsk Oblast. That's the whole point. By cutting the fat in between the three oblast area, the Russians established something that they have been missing since 2022, which is both a tactical gambit and a tactical ace of spades, which would force the Ukrainians to come to them. Because right now, one of the things that is happening, the only place where the Russians are doing rather well in the ratio is Kursk. I'm sorry to say, but you have to also hear this. The only way for the Russians to completely break the Ukrainians is to force them to come out. Running after them, even with UMPK, even with Lancets, even if somehow their AD is fucked and you can send as many Nikodets as you want, he's not going to solve the situation. It's true, you're going to fucking grind them and grind them and grind them, and you're going to end up with like 2,500 square kilometers this year, and another year, maybe next year, 4,000. But it has to be 4,000 that matter. Flattening the battlefield as it stands right now, the gaps that you have in the battlefield from one line to another, you got more or less 2,400 square kilometers that you need to take in order to flatten it completely. So, if you want to do that for a whole year, a bit like happened this year, it's not very productive. For the Russian military, it's cool, you got that ground, it's cool, you push the Ukrainians out, but some things haven't changed. For instance, the Ukrainians are still only 90 kilometers away from the coast of Azov. So they can still, if they are stupid enough, you can still try and limit your movement and your logistics through the Crimean land bridge. Your point now is for this land bridge to have at least the potential to be over 120 kilometers, because then you solve a lot of things. You solve Patriot missiles not being close to the front line. You solve HIMARS not being able to touch most of your shit at the Azov coast. You have a lot more backfield to play with your own artillery, including Iskander if needed. It will not work otherwise. And this is my problem. This is where we stand as a tactical issue, is that for the Russians, they can just, take over what is missing from a straightened front line all over the east. And indeed, as I said, they could do with 2,500, 2,600 square kilometers. Or they could try and do something, as I said, deep enough within the Ukrainian backfield, which would force the Ukrainians then to do exactly what happened with Kharkov, or even with Kursk in reverse. This choice of going either Kharkov or going Dnipropetrovsk is dangerous. The risk, as I said, the risk if you get it wrong in Dnipropetrovsk is that you're going to have a fuck ton of attrition for maybe an advancement of 15 kilometers within the oblast. You're going to end up like the Ukrainians in Kursk. You're going to lose a lot of people, you're going to get stuck, and then the Ukrainians are just going to actually grind you because you will try to advance. In Kharkov, the danger is there also for this, but due to the nature of the ground, the advancement, the chances of repeating a Pokrovsk are higher. And also, due to the fact that you are not too far from the rest of your front, going deep towards Dnipropetrovsk from Pokrovsk means that you're going to have to support your guys from Zaporozhye, from southern Donetsk, but also from Zaporozhye. This also means that your idea is to try and control as many as possible Ukrainians between your advancement along the highway or the railway and the front line that you have now in Velika Novosilka and then in Zaporozhye. It is a good option if it's limited to that. If you start grinding it, and as I said, you add a layer of 20 kilometers of depth from the current position in Zaporozhye towards Dnipropetrovsk. But then you have a problem. You are putting yourself in a broadside towards all the Ukrainian defensive positions. As we saw, the Ukrainians started to dig 20 kilometers behind the current line of contact in Zaporozhye, which means that you're going to be dead on that defensive line. And that defensive line is just kilometers away from the highway. And that's your problem there. You're going to get fucked. Or you're going to try and cope that way, and it's possible that the Ukrainians will be in such a shitty state that you may have some breakthroughs like it happened with Pokrovsk. But generally speaking, the idea of having to hop 30, 40, 50 kilometers for the Russians, whereas the Ukrainians are just going to stand in Slavyanka, for instance, or in Petropavlivka, and just let you come. It's true that they had the same laser in Pokrovsk, and they got fucked anyway. I agree. But I wouldn't try that here. I wouldn't, just because I still think the Ukrainians can learn, and I still think that it would take unnecessary risks. Now, both of them are pretty valid. If the Russians have the appetite for it, I think that if the Ukrainians break around Slavyanka, for instance, and in Petropavlivka, which is only 50 kilometers, but across the boundaries from the current front line, it's not that deep. So, sorry guys, I'm just trying to give you an idea. So, Velika Novosilka to sorry guys. To Mezhova, for instance, which is another nodule, it's 46 kilometers. So basically, once Velika Novosilka is lost for the Ukrainians, and they are pushing from Zolota Niva right now, the Russians, then it's true that you can start picking the shit of Mezhova, and of course, hitting Slavyanka because it's only 60 kilometers from Velika Novosilka. So there are choices, there are options, especially if Ugledar falls and Novosilka falls. You have options. You can deploy it. And once again, as I said, we're not speaking about a 2 or 3 week operation. We are literally speaking about a whole year. Now, a lot of people are going to, hear this and say, like, what the fuck are you talking about? We're speaking about 20, 30, 50 kilometers. What is this for a war? This is the state of the war currently. I would also like to have them fucking shoot through Pokrovsk straight to Pavlograd for 100 kilometers and capture the city. It just doesn't want to work like this anymore. FPVs are everywhere. Artillery is everywhere. Even when Ukrainians say they don't have, and when we know they do not have enough. But given how the attrition has worked for both sides, a lot of the infantry needed for this will be on very light equipment. Motorbikes, ATVs, small jeeps, pickups, some RAPs, of course, on both sides. But most of the time it means that artillery now has an even greater role in stopping the lighter vehicles when it comes to the fight, but also the infantry. So even if you want to go fast with your dirt bikes, and drop 20 guys on the position, take the position over, a well-placed artillery round, 155, is going to take half of those guys right away. And it can be when they're moving or when they can't. Instead of using 10 FPVs or 20 FPVs, a good artillery round is going to fucking calm down everyone. So it's true that compared to what we discussed last time, a lot of people probably would think like, oh, this is more of the same as last time. It's true. It's exactly that. Right now, the war in Ukraine is still an absolute attrition shit show, which means that every square kilometer you're getting is going to be paid in blood. We discussed this about the counter. I said for 1 linear kilometer, you will have to lose 100 people, KIA minimum, and at least 200 wounded on one direction. Now, make 5, 6, 10 directions as everybody does in order to, maximize the breakthrough, and suddenly you see how many people it's going to take just for the breakthrough. I'm not saying the exploitation, occupation, whatever. Just breaking through it. If you want an example, look at Russia 2002 or Ukraine, of course. Everybody thought that they would have another idea and change the way they did things from the counter 2023. They haven't. The only thing that was different this time is that there was nobody manning most of the positions they attacked. They had the element of surprise, and that's it. On the other side, the Russians do not have the element of surprise anymore. They're still advancing. That's how attrition works, guys. So, basically, the options for Dnipropetrovsk, as I said, are either going down the Samara River, either following the Pokrovsk Highway or railway. In both cases, the goal is to establish a bulge for the Russian troops. When it comes to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast advance, that bulge is meant to solidify with the front that will come from south to north, and therefore, instead of staying a bulge like it risks being in Kharkov, it will solidify into a real advance. Not that deep, as I said, probably 20 kilometers from south to north, but that would also mean that your strategic endgame of this war so far would safeguarding the Crimean land bridge would be acquired. You would actually enforce your own demand for a buffer, for a demilitarized buffer in Ukraine from the current position, as Putin said, by the force of arms. And if you're good enough and you advance, as I said, to Mezhove, then it's not 20, it's 40. And beyond Mezhove is going to be between 40 and 50. You literally would have your buffer in part of that area of the front, and then through there you're going to start threatening not Dnipropetrovsk, it's way too far, but Zaporozhye in a semi-encirclement. And as we see recently, the Russians are dropping UPKs in Zaporozhye. This means that you can also cut the city off and force them to do a huge detour of 180 kilometers to be able to reinforce the city in short notice. You can also come all the way up from Dnipropetrovsk, but as I said, it would take you a lot more time than just crossing from Mykolaiv Oblast into Zaporozhye Oblast, crossing the bridges and being ready to defend on the salient that would be created if the plan for Dnipropetrovsk worked. Like this is more or less what I had to say for these two plans. I'm going to make maps for both so you can, check yourself. Here is just a first draft, as I said. It's something that is extremely logical to me if we think the way the Russians have been thinking around the Pokrovsk area for so long. And also, it is going to become a lot easier now that Ugledar is going to go down and they can link up with Kurakovo by first clearing the pocket that they have right now north of Krasnogorivka, flattening the line, Zhelane Druhe, Zoriana, Kurakivka, and then being straight on Kurakovo. And at that moment, you, as Ukrainians, are going to have a lot of shit in your hands. Because suddenly the whole, length of a front line that was defensible for Ukraine is not anymore. Ukrainians are just fucked. They're done in the area, and the only plan that remains for them, if they want to do anything, to counter the Russians on the ground, we're not speaking about long-range strikes, we're not speaking about a rear attack campaign, we're saying with troops on the ground, would be uniquely around the area of Kamyanki going to Energodar. Going to Energodar is a shit show for the Ukrainians, because as I said, you need to go on a defilade with nobody to protect you from the rear, and you're going to open into one of the most defended sectors of the line, while also not being able to infiltrate people from the reservoir, because the reservoir is semi-dry, which means that it's a too soft ground and would require at least 2 crossings from the Ukrainian army, which can be extremely fun with UMPKs raining on them and everything else raining on them. So the Ugledar capture and the advancement of the front east to west, unlike what the Institute of Studies of War said, is going to be a backbreaker for the defensive option on the Ukrainian side. It's not going to end the war, it's not going to be some kind of super lamentation. The Ukrainians have now made a habit of glorifying something and then throwing it away like a dirty bitch. And Ugledar will just be forgotten. They made their shitty clip about how beautiful it was before and how ugly it is now that the Russians have come by. We're going to have some videos of prisoners of war. We're going to have the usual FPV gore shit that they're going to do. It's the usual. Nothing more, nothing less. These guys are not very smart when it comes to coping. So the whole point now is just for the Russian leadership, the Russian military leadership, to not drop the ball and not start pursuing them on the back of Ugledar, but leaving them try to counterattack around Novoukrayinka, because there it's extremely complicated for them to do anything else but die, and try and join as fast as possible south to north and get about 2 to 3 kilometers from Kurakovka. They already control the highway there, and start sieging the city while the salient is clear north of it, and then can start pelting them from both sides with everything they have. FPVs, UMPKs, artillery, MLRS, whatever you want. So the fall of Ugledar all but guarantees the fall of Kurakovo, and also guarantees the emptying of the pocket on the back of Krasnogorivka, north of Krasnogorivka, of course. So it's going to be a nice few days for the Russians. If things go properly, it will also belie, as I said, the idea that somehow the Russian offensive and initiative was going to get exhausted by September. But we all know that Ukrainians don't know shit about their own destiny right now. They throw a lot of things in the air and then they end up sucking cock. But, now the only focus is, I don't know if you guys know, but the alleged plan of Zelensky. And from what has been transpiring from unnamed Western officials, it would require such a quantity of long-range missiles, be that ATACMS or Storm Shadows or something else, that those would be depleted in a matter of weeks, and they seem to believe 2 to 4 weeks. Therefore, we can surmise that he has a large list and is trying to go into some kind of scorched earth option for Russia, but for which he would need means that nobody wants to give, simply because the transfer of those means, from ATACMS launchers, more planes, would probably trigger retaliation from Russia, which would exceed what we've seen right now. And that's why also the Americans are happy to give data and coordinates for strikes for their shitty drones, but not from their weapons, because they think that it's painful for the Russians, but it's not hurting them enough to make them flip. This is the same game they've played for so long. And at this point, it makes no sense if it's a drone or if it's a ATACMS or if it's a Storm Shadow. Of course, it makes sense. It's because, like, we're speaking about a 400 kilogram payload against a 30, 40 kilogram payload. But the point is, it makes no sense given everything that's happening is due to them targeting. I think Zelensky also admitted it himself by saying that, there's a US base in Germany that gives us additional targeting. Without them, we cannot target anything in Russia, etc., etc., etc. So once more, I think the Ukrainians are so desperate about the situation that they are seeing the same thing that a lot of us are seeing on the map, that we would have to see what is decided by Brandon or Chlamydia if she wins. Because for Trump, as I said, he's a maverick, he's a wild card. You never know what exactly he's going to decide. And it can go very, very fast on the wrong way, or it can be excellent for both sides in terms of suffering, actually, but pretty bad for the Ukrainians, because one of the things that everybody is trying to insist on Ukraine is that they will not lose territory, they will not sign off territory, which, unless like you have a apocalyptic event on the earth, is a sure deal. They are going to lose a huge part of the 4 oblasts that they are currently fighting for. So probably the area that they have right now, Lugansk almost 100%, Donetsk probably between 75 and 80%, Zaporozhye 80%, and then of course Kherson 75, 77%, given that there is a natural barrier, which is the Dnieper, which blocks the access to the other side, and we know that right now amphibious operations are not going to be the forte of the Russian military. So yeah, guys, that was it. I will try and, as I said, give you the maps, and hopefully you are interested by this. Hopefully I can have some feedback down the line. The most important part, as I said, is that what was discussed last year was, I'm not gonna lie, kind of easy to understand if you had put yourself into a political and military lens, as Monkey apparently does, and therefore freeing Donbass was easy. But now the objectives I discussed are going to look logical if indeed, as I said, Monkey doesn't want to stop at Donbass. If Monkey wants a buffer, especially in Dnipropetrovsk, it completely makes sense to do this. If Monkey wants to accelerate the war on the Ukrainian side and try them even more, he will go for the Kharkov operation. The Kharkov operation is the safest for as long as they advance, but it's also the most dangerous, as I said, because what they're creating is a bulge. And this bulge, that we like it or not, has always the risk of getting reduced. This is what happened with Kharkov last time, but this time, as I said, the advantage is that you have a better defensive position with the Samara River, and also it allows you to start spreading all over and threatening also the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and doing a north-south descent, which, as I said, will be mostly unopposed by troops across the river, and therefore would risk a collapse of the Ukrainian positions within the Samara River themselves. But once again, all these are estimates, all these are hunches, and all these are just what would Team War Criminals do if we were in Monkey's boots. Thank you very much. If you have anything to add, it's up to you guys. Otherwise, I will leave you for a while. Okay, apparently nobody wants to react. Well, have a nice day, guys. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time. Bye-bye.